our last speaker of the night. So Patrick Tuason, he's a manager of HR and HR reporting and analytics at Hydro One. And today he'll be chatting about making people analytics relevant, responding to COVID-19. So I'll turn it over to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Julia. Let me try and share my screen. My internet is starting to act up a little bit, so just wave at me or something if you can't understand me or start to mumble because of my internet, and I'll see what I can do, okay?
Sounds good.
Let's see here. Turn this on. Very good. Can everyone see my screen? Give me a nod.
Looks
wonderful.
good.
So as I do, thank you. So as I do my introduction, maybe we've been sitting for a while. Feel free to stretch. Don't worry, I won't look at the camera. Feel free to stretch, have a glass of water. My name is Patrick Tuason, Patrick Joseph Tuason, if you want the full name. I currently work for Hydro One. I lead the HR reporting and analytics capability there. I've been in the people analytics space, I suppose, for about 5 to 7 years now. And interestingly, my career in that space has been involved mainly in building teams from scratch, it seems, and that's where I landed. Previous to that, my background has been in many years in the consulting space, in management consulting space, and always been involved with data, and certainly a lot of learning in people analytics. And so really happy to be here today to maybe share a few of the things that I've learned through my journey, and hope you take some learnings from it, and hopefully I can learn from you as well, and then feel free to comment and ask questions as I go. So if you're ready to go and thoughtful of time, let me start with a small story. So right about the time that I started to get into people analytics, I read up a lot on it, right? And one of the things that I saw very quickly was there was a lot of literature on analytics maturity. And I'm sure you've seen this. A lot of you have probably read, Deloitte's maturity model, and Manny spoke about that early on. It started with, the race to predictive and, the 3 to 5 year journey. Now we're talking about analytics integration. And even recently, Josh Burson, I think, released an article about building analytics and making it more integrated into the business. SAP is talking about, in the space of analytics, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and sky's the limit. Coming into that, as I wanted to build my humble analytics team starting, was a very daunting task. And one of the key challenges I've had since then is really how to resonate with the leadership team, how to gain that support. A lot of these articles would speak about, starting with the business, right? But that's a very broad and challenging question. And early on in that space, I had the opportunity to speak to one of my ex-SVPs from a previous organization. And I wanted to collect more data to understand, how to make a difference when we build a people analytics team. And I think a lot of you probably in this journey also have a similar question. So we had a conversation, we talked about it, and I knew that in that previous organization that I was with, that they made very big investments in artificial intelligence and in infrastructure for analytics, including, building up a data science team and the like. And so I talked to the SVP and basically asked, so aren't you excited? What's happened? How is it affecting your day to day? And very interestingly, she responded to say, number one, certainly very impressed with the capability. Number two, can really see what analytics can provide for the business. And number three, she leaned in and kind of whispered almost and told me, I don't feel it. It's a very interesting reaction. And that stuck with me a lot, that story, because it really spoke to, You know that question when we start with the end in mind that Manny said earlier in our conversation, or a lot of the analytics maturity model talking about, you know, what's important for the business. I think that statement sums it up in terms of the big challenge that analytics has in front of it, right? And really what that is making a material contribution to the business and what that means for us, right? And I'd like to call it relevance, because I think that's the big question that we need to answer. And I would like to say, and one of the advocacies, like if you've heard me before speak about this, one of my personal advocacies in this space is that it doesn't really matter what maturity level you're in your analytics practice. I think the art of finding what's relevant for the business is where it all begins. That's where we find resonance with the executive leadership team. That's where we create the business case of why analytics makes sense for the business and why it's worth it to invest on that. I have a whole other talk that I can do on this. But for today, I think what I want to do is I want to talk about something that's easy and very relevant for our time right now, which is really a COVID example and how we've leveraged that. And through discussing this and through discussing a few key points in this space, I hope to cover a few of the key learning points that I found were very important in making people analytics relevant for the organization. Just 5 key points, if you'll bear with me. Okay? All right, so let's go. I hope you guys have stretched a little bit. So my first point in my conversation today with you is something that is very easy, and you've heard this a million times, but it's really, what's the question again? That's what, I know Manny spoke about that earlier, but when you talk about, you know, understanding the problem we're trying to solve, it really boils down to being able to pinpoint and ask the right question. So, you know, Hydro One, being the sole provider for transmission and distribution of electricity for the entire of Ontario, especially during the time of COVID, when we talk about keeping the lights on, that's very literal for us. And it's a very important thing that we need to take into consideration, especially when COVID was happening. And so very early on in that conversation, when COVID happened, I remember the Friday when I went home, and then I got a few calls that said, okay, by the way, on Monday, everyone's working from home. And we had a conversation then and said, okay, so what are we going to do, right? Where are the people? Like, I got a call from our CHRO to say, how do we know where the people are, our employees, what our employees are doing? How many people need to work from home? How many are already affected by COVID? There's so many questions. And as you can imagine, even from the analytics team's perspective, we had a lot of ideas that we could do to present data and analysis within the space of COVID. But very quickly, we took a step back and had a conversation to say, wait a minute, right? Let's try and understand what are the key things we need to get right, because we only have a few days to get this through. And we need to understand what's meaningful, what's material, what's relevant. So in that conversation, one of the things that really helped with was, you know, our CHRO was part of the conversation. And basically we asked her, so what questions are the leadership team asking you, right? What's important, what's happening? What are some of the key decisions that we need to make as an organization as this comes to fore, right? Are we ready for this? Do we know what we're up against? And very quickly, we realized that there was no one question that would kind of resonate for the entire time. Oh, sorry, that's probably not too clear, but the questions will change over time, right? It's something that we realized. So what we had to do is understand in the current context of where we were, what were the important questions we needed to ask, right? We needed to know first and foremost, you know, we're an organization that prides ourselves in the safety of our teams and our team members. So that was the first question. Are our team members safe? And as a leadership team, we wanted to understand that. Did we have a listening post or a survey that we could leverage to understand where that was? Not yet, but it was clear that that was a very important thing that we needed to answer, right? And second is, and a very important thing is, can we keep the lights on in terms of how it's impacting our team members and the community? And the concern there wasn't even a business concern. The concern there is like, oh, will the power go out? You know, like we don't know how COVID and how long COVID would affect us. And so it was very important for us to understand those two key questions. And so mapping that out was very important, and also who needs to know. And that's where the question about who's making the decisions becomes very important. And we quickly realized that it went all the way to our CEO, all the way to their executive team, and it had to start from there too. And we needed to get data and get data fast, right? So finding the right question at the very start is very important, and fine-tuning that is certainly very important. Second, what do we have? So for those of you who may not be familiar, can anyone guess where this picture came from? There's a very small text there, but I doubt if you could read it.
Apollo 13.
Very good. Yes, Apollo 13. I think I put Apollo 11, which is wrong. It's Apollo 13. But Apollo 13, I really like this movie because there's, for those of you who aren't familiar, basically what happened was Apollo 13 sends a rocket to the moon, and in that mission, tragedy happens, issues happen, and they need to get the crew back as best they can. And there was a scene there where the crew didn't have enough oxygen. So what they needed was to find a way to recycle CO2 or carbon dioxide back into oxygen. But all they had was in the ship, right? So what the NASA engineers did was they replicated item by item what was available in the ship, dumped it all to the table, got the best minds in the team to say, with what's on the table, build me a CO2 scrubber that can generate oxygen for the team. And they did. A few tubes, duct tape, a few filters here and there, recycled components. And they did. And in many ways, that was critical to saving the crew's life. I really like that story because that speaks to how important it is for us, even in the analytics space, to say, yes, maybe we don't have, you know, Watson to do AI for us. Yes, we don't even have a listening post yet to understand, you know, where our team members are. But if we sit down and look at what we have, you might be surprised what you can come up with, right? And at Hydro One, when we were in the challenge of COVID-19, that's kind of what happened. That I remember that weekend, right? We pulled in our HR systems team, pulled in our friends from IT, and basically we said, we need to collect data and collect data fast to understand where our team members are. We need a way to present that data so that our executive leadership team and the leaders of the organization kind of see and understand what's happening to the community, and then leverage that to build policies and to build decision-making, right? So what happened was, number one, we realized that we weren't using our comp tools yet because it wasn't comp cycle yet. It was early in the year. And there were comp forms in SuccessFactors that with a few tweaks here and there could quickly become a survey form that was live. And also in a secure environment because, you know, it's governed by our natural. So, you know, one of our HR systems teams actually raised their hand and said, you know what, we could use this form. Okay, go, go, go. And then luckily we were piloting Tableau and Tableau server, and you know, from an analytics says, you know what, our analytics team, we're quite familiar with Tableau. I think there's something we can do to leverage Tableau. And what we did was, and the plan was basically, we'll use Tableau prep because any data we'll be collecting through the SuccessFactors reused form wouldn't integrate with any of our databases. It's going to be manual. We're going to draw data manually. But if we're going to run this daily, you know, we're going to be spending massive amounts of manual time, and we won't be agile enough to provide the reporting. So for that, what happened was we leveraged Tableau Prep to process the data, drafted a dashboard, and at the time, I picked up a phone and talked to one of our IT friends who was still testing out the Tableau server. And I basically said, you know, it's COVID, this is an emergency. Is there any magic you can do? And lo and behold, we got it running within a couple of days. I'll speak to more of those examples as we go through, but I really like this example because you'll be surprised what you could do with what you currently have. And I promise you that even if this was Excel or something, that if you really push the thinking, there's a lot of opportunity to do something similar, right? And so that speaks to my next point, which is tear down that wall. And I'll use my example of picking up the phone and talking to my friends in IT and saying, hey, you know that Tableau server you were demoing to our team last time? Can we use that? It's COVID. You know how urgent COVID is. And my friend from IT called his boss and the like and was on it. And then within a day or two, we managed to activate the server for the team. All of that without filling up a single form. Can you imagine? Working with IT and getting something done without filling up a form. I promise you, it was a highlight of my career. I was saying like, what the things we can do if we didn't have to fill up forms. Anyway, I will park that and digressing. But I think one of the things that was interesting with the COVID experience is that it gave a lot of us a fresh excuse maybe, or an opportunity to actually park our silos for a moment and think about the challenge at hand and work together towards something. And I think that was a very powerful moment when we did that. We actually, all of that example that I shared with you, that took us about 5 days maybe to get all of those things built up. And those were phone calls and quick calls with the right people at the right time. And it's a great example of, you know, true collaboration at a critical point. So this is an example of the dashboard. I'll pause with some of my key points and maybe share with you one of the things we came up with for the dashboard. So number one, the first question we wanted to know was like, what does the workforce look like now that COVID has come in? So in the first iteration of the dashboard, basically just 3 key things we wanted to talk to understand very quickly, right? Who's working from home? Who's still in the office? Who can work and who can't work, and who's in self-isolation, and you know who's impacted by COVID. Obviously, I've hidden the numbers, but those are the first key things that we wanted to understand. And then we had to break it down based on the key lines of business or business groups that we had, so that we could see the impact based on that. And an interesting thing is, because we did need to ensure, like we had to ensure that our operations ran smoothly, was leadership had to have a clear understanding of who's not at work and when will they be back, right? And you can see from this little graph here, even just visually, how, you know, it comes in ebbs and flows in terms of like when teams would, you know, come off of self-isolation and when they wouldn't. There's actually a second page where leaders can dive in and use the filters and look at specific people, so that when they do their scheduling, for example, in a control center, they kind of say like, look, I'm down by these many people, but they should be out of self-isolation by this date, and I should be able to plan resources accordingly. This was the dashboard that we came up with within a week, and it's been very helpful in providing the key information needed for our leadership team to make key decisions on how to drive the business forward and how to ensure that our team members were safe. A lot of policies were actually driven by data directly gathered from this. There are other sub-pages and more details here that we were supporting, but this is basically the cover page for that dashboard. I'll pause there. Are there any questions from the group? Julia, I don't know if people are typing in, but.
No, I think you're good.
I'm good. I hope I'm not speaking too fast. I'm trying to be thoughtful of time. Yeah, very good. Okay. So before I go to my next point, one of the things we learned really once we collected this data is that there's actually very private information that we're starting to get captured. I remember our original form had a comment section for, you know, any other concerns for this individual in terms of, you know, being able to work or not. And sometimes managers would type in things like, oh, you know, like his mother is sick and da da da, or he has X and X, you know, disease that can be impacted by COVID. So starting to reveal very personal information. And I think, so we learned very quickly that, hey, actually COVID data is in many ways health data. And also the data we were collecting about being able to work and the like also revealed a lot about the personal constraints that people had. And while we were excited to have this dashboard in Tableau, it was in a server, and we were, you know, boldly thinking about opening it up to our managers in the entire organization, we had to take a step back and say, hey, be careful, these are people, right? And these individuals might have very private things in terms of concerns and limitations that they have that sort of get revealed by capturing it. Are we ready to capture that? How do we treat the data we're collecting here? And so that being said, it was important for us to link in our health team to make sure that, you know, the data there is treated with the same respect from a privacy standpoint. And we had to keep it in lock and key. And so that allowed us to actually look at the data and keep it safe as we went forward in the journey. Are we good so far? So I've spoken about 4 points. I'm going to my fifth. So fifth point is just keep evolving. One of the things that was very important that we learned doing this endeavor is that even the definitions of what's COVID positive evolved on a week by week basis. And for someone who's processing data, that's a nightmare because your categories keep changing every week. And even the questions, so what I put on the slide here is like, even the questions tend to change over time. You know, we started our journey with just wanting to understand if our workers were safe, or if our workforce, how our workforce was impacted, and can we continue with our business? Soon that evolved to, oh wait, but what's the financial impact? Because do we have the budget to support them, right? What policies should we build? And how do we make sure that for the impacted employees, we're helping them, supporting them, and that whatever policies we're building were fair for our employee base? And then as we go along, and now towards where we are right now, we know COVID's here to stay. So how will our business change moving forward? How can we be ready for tomorrow, and what's the long-term impact? Arguably, each of these stages is a different dashboard, if you think about it. So when I say keep evolving, an important aspect in doing the analytics for COVID, or maybe in doing analytics at all and keeping it fresh and relevant, is an agile ability to pivot to what's relevant at the time. It's important. Otherwise, you cycle through those reports that are meaningless but still keep being generated. You know why? Because the question has evolved. And will the question evolve? Of course it will. And I think COVID puts that to light. And that's one of the learning points that I think is important to keeping, you know, our analytics fresh, our analytics relevant. And thanks to tools like Tableau, thanks to tools, thanks to collaboration tools and the like, it's actually quite possible. So this is a sample of the dashboard and how it has changed now. I'll pause, maybe give you some time to reflect on it a little bit. But you can see that we've simplified the dials. we quickly realized that, you know, looking at people who can work and what's the work arrangement created a lot of data discrepancies, you know, oh, you can't work, but you're in the office, you know, things like that in terms of, you know, data validation. So to simplify that, you know, we had to really think about what's data sets that are mutually exclusive and expansive. We also added more information about things that impacted us from a business standpoint, you know, from a labor standpoint. You know, we had to understand how many of our casual or contractual workers were on standoff. That doesn't mean they've been let go. It just means that their work is on pause. How many were, because of COVID, being on a special leave of absence but paid, because there are financial implications to that. And we had to track that very closely, and a breakdown as follows. So you can see how we've evolved the dashboard very quickly to go with the times. And that's an important aspect of making sure that the analytics we do is relevant and is really helping our business in making decision making. So what's the bottom line? So one of the things that's very important to me, and the bottom line message that I really have, is that doing people analytics, the first thing that we need to understand, right, to be able to make a meaningful contribution to the business is not about how mature we are in the curve. It's the basics really of understanding the right problems that we need to solve in the organization. It's our skills in being able to break down barriers, to talk and pick up the phone and talk to IT to get what we need to do that. It's the courage to ask our CHRO to say, what do you think and what makes sense and what are the things that you don't care about, right? It's understanding the workforce that we have. It starts there, right? And even if you only had Excel, or even if you only had the humble turnover rate that you calculate on a scratch paper, what's important is knowing how to use it right, and having the agility to pivot when you need to, so that you're not stuck in the same report over and over again that becomes more meaningless over time. So I'm not saying, and this is not to diminish the power of the many great things that artificial intelligence and predictive analytics can do for us. My message is that just imagine how much more impactful these great tools can have for the business and for our practice of people analytics, if in the first place, even with Excel, you're already making a difference. That's the key message I have. So with that, talk to me. Happy to hear questions. And we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. I feel a little inspired. Excel.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And you know what? Like, I think that's the whole, I guess, idea of these events too. It's for people to, like, at an organization, if your HR team all knew basic Excel skills, I think you'd be able to get a lot further than if like one person knew really advanced Excel or machine learning, advanced analytics, and everyone else knew nothing. So I think you're right.